Kyle Shanahan, man, he is probably, because of that big, monstrous defense, going to have to replace DeMeco Ryans, if not this offseason, soon. He's got ticketed to be an NFL head coach written all over him. I mean, if it happened to Saleh, it will probably happen to DeMeco. So Kyle was very revealing. So, of course, the conversation about assistant coaches departing have an awful lot to do with this week's matchup, because here come the Miami Dolphins and Mike McDaniel. And Kyle Shanahan talked about what made Mike McDaniel a valuable quality control coach who rose through his own coaching staff to find himself the next choice of Stephen Ross to come coach the Miami Dolphins.
Anytime you have a QC, those are the guys as a coordinator you depend on the most. You know, when you're a coordinator and the players come in, everyone goes to their offices and teaches the players. And then you go back in your room and you try to put a plan together. And there's not many people available that aren't in rooms coaching the tight ends or the O-line. And then you have a guy who's been breaking down the film all week, not just for his position, but for everything. So the QCs are the guys you rely on more as a coordinator, because they're seeing the whole thing as much as you can. They're not just preparing a position. And Mike was always in that type of role. You know, I think 2 years he coached receivers for me. But all the other time, I mean, he was a great position coach, but he was more valuable in another way. I don't want a guy tied down to one position. That's kind of what happened to me when I brought Mike LaFleur here. I put him with receivers the first year, but then there's too many times. So I'm asking some stuff about the red zone and things on Thursday night, and they're in their world on what Bourne's doing or somebody. I'm like, man, I need you to help me in this area. So sometimes guys want to be position coaches fast, and I always say QC might be the best thing for you, and sometimes it's vice versa, but there's different paths to do stuff. And when you do stay in those roles longer, you do get to learn more. You don't just go right to a position and focus just on that position. So I think that's stuff that really benefited Mike, and that's why he was the one guy I was always communicating with so consistently over the years.
Ray, I don't know what got into Kyle today, but he really wanted to tell everyone what's what and how things work. He was not holding back or revealing the importance and in what directions it kind of all goes in. Would you have ever really thought that, a position coach would maybe be outranked theoretically by a quality control coach? And he just basically told you that in a way it is. You know, one guy is pulling on one string, where a quality control coach has the responsibility of making sure that as all the strings are pulled together, it all fits. And more respect for quality control than I think most people have had.
Yeah, quality control is the catch-all for the assistant head coach. I mean, there are some teams that have had that, just called it the assistant head coach. But quality control is a better way of handling the terminology of the hierarchy. What doesn't surprise me is that he revealed this much about staff assemblage, because it's his 6th year now. One of his mentors is Bill Belichick, who loves to get granular and lengthy with answers about very arcane football stuff. If you're asking him who's playing on Sunday, he's on to Cincinnati.
Right.
But he did 10 minutes one time on the value of the long snapper. And that's not an exaggeration. 10 full minutes. I mean, literally to the point where the guy who asked him the question was begging him to stop. That's where Kyle Shanahan is. That's where his mind is. He likes telling you not what he does, but he's delighted to tell you how he does it. And I think he's been at this long enough now where he feels comfortable expounding on his philosophies of what he does as a head coach / general manager / head of the football department. It makes perfect sense to me. I think he's now more comfortable than he's ever been, because he's now got last 4 years, Super Bowl, conference final, Super Bowl contender. Those guys are bulletproof. Nobody gets moved off of those unless they get into a fist fight with the owner. And he's not going to punch out Jed York anytime soon. So I think he just felt like, I could be a little bit of the professor today, show off what I know, without showing off anything that has anything to do with the actual game.
I like this. I'm here to answer some questions and give you a peek behind the curtain, Kyle Shanahan. Again, as long as he's not giving up the goat in terms of any game strategy, but talking about how those strategies actually come together. And then he was asked in relation to Mike McDaniel about how losing assistants to head coach openings affects his staff.
When I came here, I thought I had some guys that were younger that weren't going to get taken for a while, but it seemed to happen a lot faster than I expected. So that's always what I'm thinking about. Like you never know when it's going to happen, especially when our defense has success, who they're going to try to take with them. So we're always trying to get some guys in here that you can groom and you can teach. It's not just about teaching it, but guys also need to go through some stuff with you too, which makes them the most prepared. And I started doing that a while ago. When I moved Bobby Slowick over to offense, when he was on defense, moved Brian Fleury a number of years ago. He was a D-line coach when I was in Cleveland. Solon brought him in to be a QC from Miami, and then I thought he had the potential to really help us on offense, so I moved him there about 4 years ago, I think. Did the same thing with Clay Kubiak this offseason. So it's something that came up pretty fast in our first few years here, and something I always got to think about.
It's an interesting process. And he said, look, Mike LaFleur, I brought him on to be a wide receiver coach. And then I realized, like, you're way too important to putting the grand scheme together to just have you hunkered down with one position. I need you to do more. And then LaFleur obviously is, now that's Matt LaFleur. Mike LaFleur is with the New York Giants now as their offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
So it's amazing watching the process going from, you're identified as being worthy of my coaching staff, then where do you fit best on my coaching staff, then how quickly will your reputation rise through my own coaching staff to where you might be identified as someone who could one day run their own coaching staff. And Kyle really got into how he identifies new assistants to fill the openings.
Usually I like someone I've seen on the staff, like other places I've been when I didn't get to hire staffs. You get to see people's work ethic, kind of what drives them. There's two days like, man, this guy would be good with the players, and man, this guy could teach a player, or man, this guy is extremely smart and can just soak everything in, and he can type everything up, he can break everything down, he understands every blitz, every formation, he can memorize all this stuff. Who can do both of those? There's so many different variations of stuff. There's so many players that I've coached, and I can't tell you there's a number of guys that the last time I see him, when I end up having to cut them, I try to tell them, man, if you want to stop playing, like, I really believe you're made to coach. You have to get in here as a QC and learn stuff, but you're extremely smart. I love how you picked our stuff up, and I love your personality. And if you're passionate about this, and if you have a wife, she understands what you're getting into, why don't you come do this? And then they usually snap at me and say, you don't think I can play anymore? But then like 3 years later, they usually check up.
How about that? He's let guys know as he's cutting them, maybe this league isn't for you as a player, but as a coach, I see a spot in it for you. And I'm sure he's had that conversation with guys whose names you have long since forgotten. I wonder if he's had that conversation with a guy who's going to end up in Canton one day. I'm thinking Richard Sherman right away.
Yeah, but I don't think Richard Sherman is the coaching type, because I think most great players, and he was a great player in his time, have a hard time teaching not great players to be great, and it frustrates them. I know that's how it worked with Frank Robinson when he went from being a player to a manager, because he was an extraordinary player. And I think it always drove him nuts that he couldn't make a pretty good player into a great player. Why can't you see what I see? Well, because you're you. And the fascinating thing about the Shanahan thing in general is that I think now that he's got a coaching tree, he feels like showing you how good he is at botany. Basically, look at the garden I'm building, and this is how I build it. It's like the teaching part of coaching, which is, only shown to the players. It's an act of vanity that coaches get to show when they've been around for a while and they're in a safe situation. And Kyle Shanahan is in an incredibly safe situation.
But I don't think he does it from a vanity standpoint. I think he does it because he understands, like, if you are a good coach, a coaching tree happens whether you want it or not, whether there's any vainglorious moment in it for you or not.
No, but
Success
explaining it
begets
is the
opportunity.
vanity. It's not the explaining it to outsiders is the vanity. And there's nothing wrong with, vanity
Well, if he
is
were
part of
standing
the
on a
business.
corner screaming at it, yeah, but he was asked about it.
He was asked about it, but he wanted to expound on it because all coaches have an extraordinary amount of vanity. Players do. It is the nature of the celebrity athletic complex, if I can coin a term. Kyle Shanahan wanted to say all those things. He could have stopped at any point. He could have blown the question off. He wanted to talk about that, and he wanted to talk about it at considerable length. And without making this a positive, negative remark, that's an exercise in vanity. And coaches and teachers have that about them. It's that I can teach you stuff that maybe you don't know, and I can make you listen. And teachers have that vanity too, because teaching is in some ways a performative exercise. It's not just open the book to page 29, memorize all the countries in the Balkans. It's, I'm going to show you how you can learn this. And, it takes a fair amount of ego to be a good teacher. It takes an extraordinary amount of ego to be a good coach. Wonder if he's going to call Jeff Saturday this week.
What's funny is I read a tweet saying, Jeff Saturday might have had a bad game, but I don't think you can label him as more inept at this than, basically Nathaniel Hackett. Like, say what you want about Jeff Saturday and what he hasn't done. He has been to the Pro Bowl. He did have his ears closer to Peyton Manning than any other human being playing football with Peyton Manning basically throughout Peyton Manning's entire career. It's not like they found this guy sitting on a stoop in front of a 7-Eleven.
No, but they found him in a broadcast booth, and he had only coached 3 years of high school. So,
it was a reach.
And it was an incredible reach. And I'm not saying that he can't be a coach. What I'm saying is the fact that he screwed up the timeouts on the play calls. Guys do that. It's the fact that he insisted after the game that he was right on 3 separate occasions, when usually a coach will either say, I could have done that a different way.
That's vanity.
Yeah, see, that is vanity. That's, I can't show weakness. And weak people worry about whether they show weakness or not. I think he learned a lot about how difficult not only time management is, but having to explain yourself afterward. And that's the part that he's not ready for yet. And this is the first time he's gotten hit in the face with a shovel by it. And it's not going to be the last, because he's probably going to screw up something else between now and the end of the year. And, he'll come away from it with better coaching skills. I just don't know that they're going to translate into another job, not at this level.
It's always baffled me how what I think, just by watching, is the easiest part of a game to get right from a head coaching standpoint, time management, undoes so many head coaches.